Hi everyone, and welcome to another Future Design Forum 10-minute fireside Q&A session hosted by myself, Andy Smith of TDA Creative, the design, product and tech talent agency. I am delighted to be joined today by Ulrik Hogrebe, currently Senior Design Director at Carta in New York. Ulrik, thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is fun.
Good. Well, look, we'll crack straight into some questions then and keep it quick fire. But before we go to those, can you just give us, the audience, a little background about your journey to becoming a design leader now in New York at Carta?
Oh, wow. Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't start off as a designer. My first degree is actually a bachelor's in business and
Right.
communications. But weirdly enough, I stumbled myself into an internship at a graphic design agency, a strategic design agency. And I was sort of looking at the designers there and I thought, whatever they're doing looks way cooler than what I'm doing.
Right. Okay.
Um, and sort of long story short, fast forwarding a lot of sort of lucky coincidences. I ended up going to a tiny design school in Copenhagen called the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. I came out of that and got recruited into the BBC. So and started as a senior designer, which was kind of wild. I wasn't a particularly good designer at the time, but they believed in me.
They had a great design team. I remember the BBC in the early days.
Oh yeah,
Really
they were
strong design
awesome.
team.
Yeah, awesome. And it's an amazing engineering and design culture at the BBC. And so that place really kind of drilled me in my craft and getting it right. And I had some amazing design leaders to work with there, which was sort of instrumental. Um, but anyway, I really was obsessed with becoming the design director for BBC News, partly because I grew up abroad and the BBC was always on, partly because I knew it would make my mum really proud. So I
Love it.
was sort of like gunning for that position and got it. Um, and which was kind of wild. All of a sudden, I went from having no reports to having 13 reports of all sorts of ages. Um, and it was like a crash course in leadership. And I was rubbish at it, and I'm still sorry to my colleagues from that time. But eventually, it worked out. We did some good stuff. I learned a lot, and then I met my partner in the UK, but she was living in New York, so called up a friend from Frog, got them to give me a chance to interview. Got in there, was a design
Brilliant.
director there for a while. WeWork rolled around, right, which was sort of like the biggest game in town at the
Yeah.
time, and they offered me a front row seat, and I said yes, I'll take that. And it was wild, but there are movie shows and TV shows and whatnot about that, which so I won't go too much into that, but again, lots of learnings from that. Um, and then after that, I went back into agency side. I was RGA for a sec. More as just sort of like a break from the stresses of in-house to do the stresses of agency. I do
Yeah.
prefer in-house though, so I came back to
Pros and
do a
cons,
small
both
startup.
sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then I went back out to do in-house in a tiny startup that was trying to sort of innovate within the moving business. Worked there for a little over a year, ran out of cash eventually. That's startup life. That's kind of the risk that you take. And then now I'm at Carta, where I run what's called the cap table team, which is sort of our core product. I have a team of 8 designers out of a larger team of about 30 some designers. We're a couple of directors, a VP of design, sort of like span the gamut.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Good journey. And I think that mix of agency, particularly, really strong design agency like Frog and a pure play digital, really strong on product like RGA, and then all the client side is a lovely development through to where you are now. So let's get a few questions going and see if we can glean some of your knowledge. Can you give us 3 tips for aspiring design leaders who are on the journey to becoming a design leader?
Yeah. I have a couple of things that I sort of tell people that are coming up through the ranks and that I'm trying to sort of like get into leadership, right? And I think the first one is, and one that I hear quite a lot from sort of designers is like, do I need to abandon my craft? Do I need to become a manager versus a designer? And I've always said like, no, right? Like,
Yeah.
please do not abandon your craft. Partly because for a lot of designers, like that's why we became designers in the first place, right? Like that's the fun part of it is
It's
being,
the passion.
it's a passion part, it's a crafts part of it. I think also being a designer, like you can do something that nobody else in the room can do, right? Like, and doubling down on that, like that's where your credibility comes from. Like you're at the table because you're a designer. And so like when you give up on craft and you kind of become a less great designer than everybody else in your org, you start to lose the credibility from your peers because you can't solve design problems any longer at that level, right? To
Yeah.
be able to span from top to bottom. And you lose credibility with your junior designers, right? Who are looking to you to inspire them for the things that they're passionate about, which is partly craft, right? Um, I think the last thing is that, like I think you fundamentally lose the ability to solve problems through making. And I think that that's what design is, right? It's a making based problem solving discipline. And once you sort of start to get away with that, you kind of lose the ability of the making, of thinking through your hands and thinking through making. And I think that that's a very specific thing that designers do really well. And because of that, they can make strategy sort of tangible from vision down to final pixel.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So I hear a couple of words quite a lot just when we're actually doing the recruitment piece of what we do, that player coach role.
Yeah.
That hands-on leadership, but can still kind of get in the weeds, right, and use the craft. So
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay, thank you. And any tips for design leaders on how to elevate design within an organization, whether it be a fintech or a larger global organization going through digital transformation? How do we elevate design? How do we get it to that top
Yeah.
table?
Well, I mean, I think sometimes um, people sort of confuse the idea of bringing design to the table with having a designer at the table, right? I I think sometimes designers believe that having a seat at that table now means that the organization is sort of like obliged to take all the things that we as designers think are great, right? And we have to
Yeah.
do everything. We have to be design led. You have to take on all our processes and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's actually wrong and perhaps slightly arrogant of us at times, right? Um, I think you really have to look at, where is the company? What is it doing? What's it trying to do? And which elements of design are useful for the company at any given time, right?
Great.
So as an example, one of my employers, um, their whole strategy was about getting to market as fast as possible because they were disrupting a legacy business. Anything that they were going to put out was liable to be better than what they had before. So really what design was there to do was just provide executional speed, right? Let's get it out as fast as possible. And that's a perfectly valid strategy. We
Yep.
weren't indexing on quality like that. Later on down the line, right, then all of a sudden there are other entrants into the category. There's lots of stuff happening. Then design shifts. And now our focus became about creating the best possible product so that we could outcompete our competitors. And that means that we are now focusing on a different set of what design can do. So having that sort of like higher strategic wherewithal of like, what is the company trying to do and how can design help that?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, oh, there's only one way for a company to be and it's design led. I just think that that gets you into trouble, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Okay. That's very good advice. Almost, looking for how can we complement and be a piece in that puzzle at that given time for the mission at the time.
yeah, yeah,
Excellent.
100%.
Thank
Yeah,
you for that. Okay. Question I get asked a lot, again, recruitment piece, but when you hire for designers, what are you looking for in a portfolio and how do you like to see it presented to you?
yeah. I think that there's two parts to sort of like a portfolio, right? So there's partly that's when I screen, I'll have like 50, 60 candidates that I'm just going through, looking at their online portfolios and their LinkedIn. Your online portfolio, just give me the highlights. Truthfully, I'm going to spend 1 to 2 minutes on them at a time. So really just make sure that I kind of see, oh, right, you've got craft, you've got strategy, you've got process, and I need to see that within a minute, right? That gets you through the door. Um, I think the second part of it is, yeah, like at the end of the day, when I hire somebody, I need to feel confident that I can drop them into a squad and they will just perform from the start. Right? I don't need to teach you the basics because that's a poor use of my time a lot of the time, unless I have a huge design org that's set up to sort of take in more junior designers and sort of teach them. And often I don't, right? My teams are 8, 10 people typically, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what I really like to see is like I don't mind the presentation per se, but what I'll do with people is I'll ask them to open their Figma files quite often, not always, but quite often. And I'll look at how are their files organized. Are they telling, like, can I see, oh, here's like the business needs and the user needs and the
Story.
tech constraints, and like how is that executed into the final pixel, right? And that gives me confidence that you can make the flows, you can think of the error states, you can think of all like where's the data coming from, how's it structured, all that kind of stuff. And if you can do that, right, then I can put you into a squad and you'll function and you'll deliver high quality work. And then anything else, right, I can elevate you up in that. I can, teach you the strategic stuff, all that kind of stuff like that. But the baseline, right, the
Yeah.
core, where I feel confident is like, are you passionate about your craft, and can I see that in your work?
Wonderful. Some great advice there. Thank you.
Yeah.
And very topical, but can you give an example where AI can help advance design?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not dismissive of it, right? I think a lot of designers are sort of like vaguely dismissive of it. We kind of fall into two camps, right? And I'm kind of fiddling with it. I'm asking, trying to use tools, asking, AI to sort of create a set of wireframes for me as sort of jumpstart the process, right? And I think it's interesting. I think typically the results that come back are somewhere between bad to sort of decent, right? But I think actually maybe I'll start somewhere else. I kind of came up in sort of like an old school graphic design environment, and one of the things that the partners did was that they talked a lot about don't let the tool define your outcome. And so what they would do is that they would walk around and they would say, like, you have been in your computer for far too long. Come back, sketch by hand. Show me what you can do by hand. And then go back into the tool and use the tool to speed up your execution, your delivery, your accuracy, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes I worry with sort of like AI that you kind of will have a bunch of designers who are very defined by what AI can do rather than what their creativity and their craft allows them to do. But I mean, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
And I'm down to find out, and maybe it's going to be great, right? But I think right now we're kind of at the phase where, like everybody is sort of looking at it, and it's kind of like pulling the rabbit out of the hat, right? And
Yeah.
everybody's like going like, we're fascinated with the magic and not the outcome, right? We're focusing on the fact that
Yeah.
somebody just pulled a rabbit out of the hat, and not the quality of the rabbit. And I kind of I'm still curious to see where that's going to go, right?
Okay. I think we all are. Okay. And look, thank you. Some great content there. That'll be very useful. And lastly, can you tell us something about yourself that few people know?
I mean,
There's a little
yeah,
curveball for you.
it's a yes, absolutely, right? Like I actually think that you kind of I okay, yes. Okay. I guess one of the things that I don't think people know a lot, I wear headphones a lot in the office, right? I don't think people really understand what's actually in my headphones. Um, and I have this thing that I picked up many, many years ago that if I really need to crank through a problem, if I really just need to focus and get like into flow state, the thing that will do that reliably and fastest is like very, very loud Norwegian black metal. And
Black metal, yeah?
yes, I know, and it's
Alrighty.
kind of ridiculous. And I don't like listen to it sort of like generally when I'm like walking around the house or anything,
It's just
but
your
for
zone
some
music.
reason, like that, there's something about like the discordant sort of screaming that just like quiets everything else down in my brain,
That's
and then I can
interesting.
just focus on the design and just get it done.
That's
Which is
interesting.
yeah.
Love that. Well, thank you for that. And look, a massive thank you for joining me. Really enjoyable chat, and there's some great content and advice there. and I'm sure our audience will enjoy. So thank you from everyone, Ulrik.
I had such a good time. Thank
And
you
we'll
so
see
much
you
for
again
this.
soon on some future events.
Cool. Thank you.
Cheers.